Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another the Osborne Group chat. Today, we have a special guest, my friend Shino Tanikawa, who is, among other things, an expert in diversity, equity, inclusion, and works for a environmental not-for-profit. And I know Shino from some work that we do here in New York City around schools and desegregating the New York City schools. So thanks so much for being on, Shino.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And then, of course, Laurel and I are here as not always, but as we often are. Hi, Laurel.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Shino.
Hi, Laurel.
So yeah, so when at the time of this recording, this is about a week after the death of George Floyd. But today's topic, we really wanted to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this is something we had been talking about for a while and wanting to do some conversations around this. And so it feels timely right now that this is happening. But we think this has been an important issue in the not-for-profit community, and I think remains an important issue. And it feels like maybe now, I don't know what you guys think, that the discussion to me right now feels qualitatively different. It feels like people are maybe listening. And so maybe this is an opportunity to get our voices out there on this. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. Oh, and Bob, I'm just really excited to have Shino here today too, to share her perspective. And I think your point's a good one, that there's been a lot of really great articles that have been put out, but Vuli, nonprofitaf.com, put out a great article the other day. Recommend you all check that out at his website. But and he talked about the role of the nonprofit sector and fundraising in all of this. And I am excited to kind of have this conversation to continue some of those discussions. I think sometimes in this sector we feel maybe immune from some of these things, or maybe like we already know some of these things, and I think sometimes that's a contributor to the problem. So excited to be talking about this, and really excited to hear from Shino today.
Yeah, so why don't we dive right in? So we'll give you an easy question first, Shino. Why is it important for not-for-profits to care about this kind of work? Why is the diversity, equity, inclusion, justice important?
Oh my goodness. Is it too late for me to pull out of this? That's the easy question.
Of being a little
yeah, facetious. Okay. Well, so nonprofits exist to serve the public in one way or another, whether it's natural resources or people. You exist for a particular cause, and that's usually not a self-interested cause, but as an organization, nonprofits are trying to change the world in some way, or change the system that we operate in some way. And if that is the basis for the existence of nonprofit organizations, then it actually behooves all of us to think about who we are serving, and to whom this work matters, and with whom we have to be working. And from that perspective, and then you overlay that with the population of the United States, where white people are not going to be the majority in the coming decades. And even if the white people are the majority, this is a nation of multiple people from multiple countries around the world, multiple histories. And if you're not tapping into everybody that is within your community, whether it's your donor base or your membership base, if you're not appealing to different people, then you're actually not maximizing your potential as an organization, right? If you want to do a fundraising event and you're only drawing from a particular segment of your donor base, then you're missing out on the rest of them. If you are a membership organization, but your membership only looks a particular way, you're missing out on your membership base. So that's one of the reasons why I think it makes sense for not-for-profits to start thinking about, who do we need to reach out who do we need to recruit on the board, as members, as donor base, because our country isn't made up of one particular people anymore. So it's a really hard question, but that's sort of where my head is.
Yeah, I think those are exactly right. We all serve on boards and have been, and we volunteer for not-for-profit organizations, and sometimes it's a hard thing to kind of quantify. But what I can say is that one board I was on when we added, it was basically 11 men and one woman. When we added a few women to the board, it really changed the dynamic and effectiveness of the organization. It was immediately clear to me. The change was immediately clear, and it's hard for me to sit here and tell you exactly, to kind of quantify that or describe what the difference was. But I would say this organization is stronger for it. And another organization I worked with kind of did the opposite. They had a bunch of people that looked, and then when I say looked, I mean in a broad sort of way, like they come from the same sector, they come from the same backgrounds, and there was a lot of groupthink, and it was very, very hard for them to break out of that. And even though they knew they needed to break out of it, and they knew they needed to make some changes, I don't mean just for its own sake, they couldn't. And the organization has struggled. And I think now, given the situation, I haven't talked to them lately, are probably really struggling. Because they're not well set up for the current situation. They knew they wouldn't be, and they weren't able to change.
Yeah, and at a more pragmatic, everyday, practical level, I remember talking to a friend of mine who's an executive director at an international nonprofit, and they distributed mosquito nets to places where malaria is a huge issue. So the initial program they ran, they distributed the nets to men in this particular village. Men apparently used all the nets to go fishing. So the malaria rates didn't go down, right? I mean, use it for fishing, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the program was to reduce malarial infection. So then they decided, oh, wait, we have to distribute these nets to women because women actually care that their children are protected from the disease. So that's when the program actually became more effective. This is just another way of, the solutions we come up with are not always the right solution for the problem we're trying to solve. And we can only come up with the right solution if you have different perspectives in the room. So that's another reason why I think it's really important for organizations, not at the board level, just at the board level, donor base and membership, but also the staff level, people who are actually developing these programs and developing solution to the problems. You have really diverse perspectives. You'll come up with better solutions that actually work.
Yeah, the staff issue is a really interesting one. I think this is something that has been talked about a lot, but maybe not talked about enough, which is just how do we create more opportunities for people of color, especially in fundraising. And I think, Bob and I can both attest to often feeling like some of the only people of color in big fundraising conferences and things. And I know I've met quite a few young people of color and tried really hard to encourage them to, pursue a career in this. But what are your thoughts in terms of bringing up kind of a new generation of nonprofit staff and workers, particularly fundraisers, that can be more representative?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, because I think probably the easiest part of this is hiring people, diverse people, whether it's people of color or people with disabilities. Hiring is probably the easiest part. How to retain them, I think, is the real challenge, because retaining those people that you hire means that you actually have to change the organizational climate. Right? So I bet there are a lot of people out there who'd love to have a job with a not-for-profit, young people, people of color, people with disabilities, people who are not your normal, I don't want to say normal, conventional nonprofit affiliated people. I bet they're out there. I think what we need to do better is, one, recruiting them, but also two, retaining them to make sure that the work environment respects their opinions, respects them as people, and really respects their contribution that they bring to the organization. And that's not always easy to do, but I think there are young people with really, enthusiastic energy to bring to the nonprofit sector. And it's really for us old-timers, that's just Bob and me, not Laurel, to think about, how do we create that environment where these people would actually want to stay and felt valued.
Yeah, well, that's where the inclusion comes in, right? And it's, I don't know what both of your experiences have been, but I feel like until recently, there was a feeling like this is a box that has to be checked. We need to just do this. Funders aren't going to give us money if we don't do it, or even this the right thing, but not really thinking too hard, beyond just sort of checking the box and making sure that people of color are on staff and that they're that they're on the board. I feel like lately it's gotten better, but it's more challenging in a way too, because it's really an exercise, as you were kind of intimating, in change management, right? It's not just making those additions, but like, how do you actually change the culture of an organization so that people feel welcome and included and want to stay? And I think that's sometimes challenging because change is always hard. And sometimes people don't always see the need for change, and it may feel like, well, we're doing good work. Why do we have to change? Things. What's broken? Why does something have to be different?
Yeah, and one more thing that I think we might want to think about is there's a nonprofit that I'm a big fan of. It's actually a foundation that makes grants to grassroots organizations. And this organization actually made an effort to create donor base that are former grantees. So these are grassroots people. They're not rich. They're not writing, $20,000 checks. What they do is they contribute maybe $20 a year or even $15. But there is this small group of donor base for this organization that is also advising the organization on the direction of their grants programs. So I think, that's another sort of creative way of thinking about who your donor base is. It doesn't always need to be made up of rich people with a big checkbook. I think you can create sort of a hybrid donor/constituent base that is made up of young people who don't have a lot of money, but have a lot of energy, a lot of great ideas. And they can be maybe brought in as, people who contribute $20 a year, and lots of great innovative ideas. It's sort of like the Obama campaign when he was the presidential candidate that raised a lot of money with just thousands of people who donated $20 per person. It's that kind of shifting the donation base to a wider constituents rather than fewer, richer people. I think that's something that nonprofits should explore as a creative way of expanding donor base and raising some funds at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think such a great point, Shino, too, about creating equity and influence across our donor base. I think that's been something that has been being talked about more, and really being talked about more now, which is not just, do we have more donors who are giving at lower levels, but do we give the same level of influence to donors who are giving at lower levels as donors who are giving at $1 million? A donor who gives $10 may not get their name on a building, but it doesn't mean that they don't get the same amount of input into our programs, into what we're doing, as somebody who gives $1 million. So it is a really interesting concept around kind of the level of influence that donors get to have based on how much they give.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, though, Bob, that you and I have talked, and Karen have talked about a lot too, though, is this idea that diversity and raising big dollars from donors are not mutually exclusive, right? That there are big donors of color, and there is, you know, a lot of, and so I think this, one of the things that has been challenging to me around conversations with fundraising and diversity is almost this assumption that people of color don't give a lot of money in this country, because they do. And I think when we start making blanket assumptions about kind of big donors, we're kind of leaving those big donors of color out of that conversation. So I think it's, you know, again, important to just, you know, remember that it's complex, right? Like there's just, we have a lot of balls in the air that we're trying to juggle.
Yeah.
This is a source of great frustration to Laurel and I in our business, because I mean, sometimes it depends on where you are and your geography. This could be more or less challenging, but we find that people give up on it a little too easily. So, or either they either go in with the assumption, you know, that these are mutually exclusive, and you're just going to add a person of color, but they're not going to have any money, and they're not going to contribute in the same way, and they're basically there for other reasons, hopefully strategic reasons, but I think we all know that that's not always the case. Sometimes people are just added for the sake of adding them without realizing, you know, studies have shown we get asked less, you know, when we would give more if we were asked more. People just kind of don't think that there's money there, and then I think a lot of times people, you know, boards have a hard time because we're all white, or we're all, you know, look the same or come from the same walk of life in some way, and so we don't know these other communities, and we don't know how to you know, how to approach them. And I think, and we find that people give up a little too easily, instead of really thinking hard, or finding that young person that maybe isn't obviously, you know, wealthy now or affluent or influential, but is maybe in a position that they will be in 6 or 7 years, that would be happy to serve and be happy to be asked, because this would be their first experience. So, you know, and as you pointed out before, you know, you need the full capital of people, you know, in this work, and people maybe can't write a big check, but they may have influence in other ways, and connections into the communities that you're trying to reach. So I am happy that recently this feels like it's changing a little bit to me too. Although I think, I don't know if you agree, Laurel, it's still it's still a challenge, I think, for organizations, but it feels like it's a challenge that people want to tackle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So Shino, you know, I know that you've been, you know, you've actively participated in diversity, equity, inclusion work as part of task force and the like. Like, what's been the most successful parts of that, and what have been the challenges of that kind of work?
The successful part, I would say, is when you have sustained conversations, right? Multiple conversations over time. Some people will actually come around to see the light, and they deepen their understanding of why this work is important, and people commit to continuing this work. So that's very gratifying. And, you know, giving people the opportunity to talk about these difficult issues of racism, ableism, and whatever other isms that we need to tackle. It's difficult conversations, but it's actually rewarding as well, because it does allow you to understand the world at a deeper level. And I think that actually all makes us better activists and better at working towards our nonprofit purposes and goals. So I've had, and you and I, Bob, together, we've had some success through our diversity committee, talking to people and actually, you know, allowing them to see the world through a different lens. And I think that's really a big part of doing this work. The challenging part is there are people who resist doing this work for whatever reason, because it is hard. It does make you uncomfortable in many ways. And not everybody is ready to be uncomfortable. So that continues to be challenging. And also seeing the current uprising, again, it's not the first time we're seeing this. It's not the first time we hear about police brutality. So, you know, we had Eric Garner in 2014, 6 years later. Nothing seems to have changed. So the pace of progress, which is just really, really, really slow, and sometimes it just feels too slow, can be really discouraging. But I think, I mean, the positive definitely outweighs the negative, because I'm still doing this work and I'm still here, and I'm, you know, still more than ever committed to keep doing this work. So I guess it's a good thing, but.
Yeah, well, as you point out, Shino, I mean, you know, it does feel like just the work that you and I have done, and just to get people up to speed, we were doing some work in our school district around desegregation and around New York City in general. And I feel like the group and the conversation we've had now is much larger, much more clarity, much more support, many, many more voices than there was, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. And I know you were talking about it even longer than that. And so I imagine there's a very big difference. So I would agree with you. It's slow, but you know, one of my clients I was talking to the other day, when I had done an original assessment of them a couple of years ago, you know, was moving in this direction, but definitely struggling with it a bit. And talking with them yesterday, they've completely, you know, they've really changed. I was like, wow, I wasn't expecting this. You know, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's a very different conversation and a very different context for the work they're doing. And now they're ready to really move beyond the initial work they were doing, and really, you know, they've done a lot of great work with their staff. They've done a lot of great work with their board. Now they're going to do some work with their donor base. So I was amazed. So it can change. But like you said, it can be slow sometimes.
And that's all great news for the other nonprofits who haven't started this work, because there are best practices out there already, right? There are other organizations that have done it, and you don't have to create everything from scratch. So I helped New York City Audubon develop equity, diversity, and inclusion EDI plan for New York City Audubon. And it was great. It was a really wonderful experience where we talked about fundraising. We also talked about the board makeup and volunteers and hiring practices and everything. And it's really a great plan. So another environmental organization wants to do something similar. They don't actually have to create everything from scratch. There are other organizations that have done this, and they can actually copy what they've done, right? I mean, each process will be different because people in the room will be different, but I think there's a lot of progress that is being made that makes it easier for the future organizations to do this work.
Absolutely. I have a question for both of you. I mean, I think one of the things that I've heard this last week is from nonprofit leaders themselves, fundraisers, executive directors, who are getting ready or who are actively out talking to their constituencies, right? They're talking to donors, they're talking to board members, they're talking to volunteers, they're talking to their program recipients. And I guess, you know, Shino, you mentioned that just talking about this can be incredibly uncomfortable, right? And I think for a lot of people, it's just getting the conversation started, getting those first few words out to start a conversation. Any advice for leaders who know that they need to have some of these conversations with their boards and volunteers and everyone, but just aren't sure how to even start the conversation?
Tough question.
I know it's a big one, but I'm curious if you have any ideas.
Right, putting in the context of what's happening right now, I think being cognizant of your own racial identity and the racial identity of the person you're talking to is a huge first step. right? As a white person, you don't want to go up to a black person if that person is your board member or friend or the most important member. Oh dear, I'm sorry, just a sec. Sorry about that. You don't want to, you want to be aware of what your racial identity is and the person's racial identity, and you have to frame the conversation in that way with the context of what's happening. So it really means, you know, you don't want to just go up to your black friend and say, hey, what's up, what's happening, or how, just, it's difficult. You have to start somewhere, but you have to be at least aware of who you are and who the person is. And really open your ears and be in the listening mode. I think that's really important. Not to go to that place of defensiveness, which sometimes people with more privilege tend to do, and center the other person and not yourself. I mean, this is something that I have to remind myself all the time, talking to my black friends. It cannot be, the conversation cannot be about me. It has to be about them, how they're doing, what they're feeling. And if they don't want to talk, then they don't want to talk. I can't push the issue on them. So it's difficult. And I think also you have to remember that you will make mistakes, and that's okay. I think it's better to fumble than to not do something.
That's really great advice. I think a lot of people are feeling stuck because they're afraid to fumble. And I think that's intention is important, right? I mean, knowing that we all have good intentions and we're coming from a good place, and making that heard and known is probably pretty important right now too.
Yeah, and I would say it's good advice just in general, you know, for development officers and executive directors. You know, we always want to be listening and thinking about the person we're talking to and where they're coming from, and you know, and so that's particularly important now, given the situation, particularly if you're talking to a person of color or an African American specifically, after the murder of George Floyd. But I think it's true also with COVID. You know, we don't know how that's affecting any given person, and it's important. You know, you and I, Laurel, have talked about this quite a bit over the last couple of months about checking in with people and making sure that that they're just okay, and making that be primary and genuine, even though we all have our needs and are scared and worried about money and our missions and our, you know, but it's a time right now to be sensitive to that, and it pays off. I think those things are appreciated by people. I think it gets noted, and I think it gets very much noted the other way. You know, like I've certainly gotten lots of, you know, Black Lives Matter and various things coming across my desk, some of which I've appreciated, some of which have really pissed me off. So it's, you know, it's just, it very, very much depends on what you get. And as not-for-profits, we have to be careful right now. But I think the safe thing to always do, as you pointed out, Shino, is to reach out and to try in a way that is genuine, in a way that is going to be genuine. I think that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah. And, you know, a couple like rules of thumb that I try to remind myself is remembering that I don't know what I don't know. That's just one of the things that I repeat to myself all the time. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And also, a lot of people don't do this well, and sometimes I fall victim to this, but I have to listen to understand, not listen to respond. Mm-hmm. Especially when we're talking about really touchy subject like race and racism and police brutality or racial disparity of the COVID-19, people do go to that place of defensiveness. And when people are in that defensive place, they automatically go to this listening to respond mode, right? They're listening to somebody talking, and then they go to that place of, okay, how am I going to counter what they're saying so that I don't come across like the bad person? that's not helpful. You have to always listen to understand. And sometimes it'll make you feel bad. And, you know, you'll be overcome with this feeling of guilt, but sit with it. It's okay. That's a lot better than to respond with a whole bunch of excuses and self-defense that aren't going to be taken well by the person that you're talking to.
Yeah. Well, spoken like, well, that's the thing we talk about in the Osborne group quite a bit. So
Speaking from my mistakes, you learn from your mistakes, which is actually a good reason why you don't want to be afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, because that's really the only way you can learn to do this work, right? Yeah. You'll continue to make mistakes. That's okay, because you will learn from that experience.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Exactly. Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Shino. This has been a really great discussion. I am hopeful that you know, that the current circumstances and the uprising and all the things that are happening right now will foster some dialogue and some, you know, some soul searching by, you know, the world, but also in our business, you know, the not-for-profits. And Laurel, I'll let you reference that article again, because I thought it was interesting. I hope also in the foundation world, you know, there's been some things that have come out. Bridgespan, I think, did a study where African-American executive directors receive, you know, significantly less funding from foundations than African-American led organizations receive significantly less funding from foundations. And then Laurel was referencing an interesting article. I'll let you mention it, Laurel, because I don't remember exactly where it was, but I'm halfway through reading it. I found it to be very, very interesting. So I hope funders also give some thought to this in a real way. You know, I think it gets talked about a lot, but I think some of this recent information kind of shows that it's not as effective as maybe as it could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to remind everybody, it's the website is nonprofitaf.com by Vu Lee, and he does great stuff. You should follow him anyway. He's hilarious. He does really great stuff. This article is not hilarious, but it is really timely and really has a lot of really great points. So you should definitely go check out nonprofitaf.com and check out his stuff. And Shino, I just want to also thank you. You said a lot of things today that have made me think about how I've been kind of thinking about things in the last week, and some really good reminders for me as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. You know, I could talk all day on this topic, so have me back anytime. I'd love to come back.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.